Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. The Memphis Grizzlies got knocked out of the playoffs last month, but Ja Morant is still in the news anyway, and when it comes to him, that is never a good sign. He's back. Once again, he's been caught flashing a gun on Instagram Live. Actually, it was one of his friends who was driving the car and holding the camera phone when this incident happened. Smart driver that one is. And the gun in Morant's hand was only visible for a second before the driver/cameraman realized it, and although the gun was only visible for a few frames of the video, it was still on screen, and worst of all, it went out live. Cue the white media feeding frenzy, that train is never late, though we need to be honest, Ja Morant has put himself in the trick bag again. Typically people ask, well, isn't there someone who's looking out for this guy? Where are his parents at? He's got both of his parents, by the way. His father is in his life. But Ja Morant is a grown man. He has a child of his own, by the way. He's a father himself. The question is, why isn't Ja Morant looking out for himself? Why isn't he acting like an adult? Better yet, why isn't he acting like a businessman? Back in March, I did a Sunday address specifically about black people needing to control who they let in their circle and who they allow to remain in their circle. And I focused on Jonathan Majors and Ja Morant. You see, these are what you call self-inflicted wounds, because he keeps on getting himself into these situations. July of last year, Morant's mother went to a finish line in a mall in Memphis. Apparently, she was upset about the service or something. Now, typically when this happens, you ask to speak to a manager, but Morant's mother decided to call him instead. She didn't call her husband, she called her son. Ja Morant shows up, but he doesn't come alone. He brings, I guess you'd call it his entourage with him. The cashier goes and hides in a back room for nearly an hour, and Ja Morant apparently is standing outside the door banging naked threats during all this time. A world-famous basketball player, and this is what he does. But apparently that wasn't enough for him, because as Morant and his boys were leaving the mall, the director of mall security was escorting them out, but according to the security director, they refused to leave the parking lot. This escalated into yelling. Some threats were thrown in an altercation in which one of Morant's boys pushed the director in the face, allegedly. No arrests were made, and according to the Washington Post, when they called the Memphis police to ask about it, Memphis PD said there was no report. The Washington Post had to go to the cashier to get the report, and according to the Post, Morant wasn't listed as a suspect, and his mother's name was listed as unknown. Well, I guess he must have been having a bad week, because just 4 days later, Morant was having a pickup game at his house, and he got into an altercation with a 17-year-old. The teenager also claimed that Morant flashed a gun at him as he left the property. Morant claimed it was self-defense. And then 2 months after that, Ja Morant's sister was competing in a volleyball game at her high school. Ja Morant wasn't there, but after his sister got into an argument with another student, Ja Morant came up to the school in the middle of that game, and he brought his mother, his father, his entourage of dudes, and even his baby daughter, according to the police report. Apparently, police were on the scene now, but one of Morant's boys decided to slip past them and run up into the stands and allegedly slapped a cell phone out of a student's hand and threatened them. Fortunately, no charges were filed in that incident either. Talk about dodging bullet after bullet. Clearly, the Memphis police are trying to cut this guy a break. But there's no cure for stupid, because if 2022 was a very busy year for Morant misbehaving, in 2023 he's been going for a personal best. January of this year, Ja's team was playing against the Indiana Pacers. During the game, one of his boys decided to get into an argument with one of the Pacers players. That individual had to be escorted out of the arena. After the game, the Pacers players said that they saw a car with Ja Morant and some of his pals in it, and that someone in the car pointed a red laser at them, which they thought was probably from a gun. March 4th, the Grizzlies lost yet another game, this time to the Denver Nuggets. So what did Ja Morant do after this latest defeat? Did he go to the facility so he can sharpen his skills, work on his fadeaway jumper? No, instead, he headed to the nearest strip club and began making it rain. Because, hey, after you lose a game, that's a perfect time to celebrate, right? You want to know why so many of your favorite ball players don't seem to mind losing games all the time? It's because they don't. This was the infamous incident where he went on Instagram Live and with a huge grin began brandishing a gun in front of the camera. He was suspended for 8 games without pay. That was the last we heard of him before this week. He made a mea culpa after that last incident, but as I said in my video about this shameful string of incidents that he keeps getting himself into, This guy is on self-destruct. How many times do these incidents have to happen before someone asks what the common denominator in all of these incidents is? Now, I also noticed a couple of other details about these incidents too. First of all, haven't you noticed that Ja Morant seems to really get into fights with teenagers? What is it about children that this guy likes to have fights with teenagers over? He keeps doing that over and over again. And there's also something else that I noticed, probably closely related to the first. Ja Morant's mother seems to be involved in a couple of these incidents too. And Ja Morant's father seems to also be, if nothing else, a passive bystander while all this is going on. I mean, you got a father who ain't being head of household here. We have a terrible practice in our community where we got too many times you got single mothers who treat their sons like boyfriends, or, and this is just as bad, you have fathers who don't function very well as fathers because they do not lead their household. In Ja's case, he seems to have the worst of both worlds. He's worth millions of dollars, though a lot less since he started doing all this stupid stuff. Even if his mother keeps dragging him into mess and his father has no interest in stopping him, isn't Ja Morant supposed to have enough sense and enough strength of character to not put himself in these situations in the first place? What kind of person thinks that Instagram is more important than income? And don't even try to claim that this is an issue of immaturity. You have a ton of other NBA players who are also the same age as Ja Morant, many of them younger, and you don't see any of them doing this dumb stuff. So this isn't about age. This is a character flaw, and a serious one. I did a video a few weeks back about weak black men, which apparently some weak black men in the comments didn't like. More than a few people resented that I went in on Hush Puppy of all people. By the way, what was Hush Puppy? Oh, that's right. He was an Instagram influencer too. Gee, a lot of Negroes seem to get mega triggered whenever you start talking about certain folks on Instagram. I wonder why. And one of the things that I highlighted was that the number one sign of a weak black man is that he keeps getting into beefs, especially with a bunch of random people. People who didn't say anything to him, didn't do anything to him, but he's so eager to either start fisticuffs or to give him a piece of their mind or what have you. Seems like every time you look up, there's some black folks who are just getting into it with somebody, and more often than not, it's somebody who didn't do anything to him. It's somebody that they don't even really know. Well, Ja Morant is a prime example of this. When you see a black man who gets a little bit of money in his pocket, and almost the first thing he does is start getting into it with randos, it's time to ask if maybe he's the problem. I know a lot of you sports fans probably won't like hearing that, but it's a fact. We have too many black people, and as Ja Morant shows, too many black men who are insecure with themselves and try to mask it behind bravado and bragging about their little old accomplishments instead of being about the business. I don't care how financially well off or how smart you think someone is. When you see these behaviors, that's a black man who's weak. That's a black man who's heading for a bad conclusion. We need to recognize when we're seeing a black man on self-destruct, and just like Ja Morant has people online cheering on his self-destruction, we see it with other people too. A lot of black folks will gladly praise and big up other black people to sabotage themselves. And when that black person inevitably crashes and burns, those people will celebrate that too. And you know what? If you're the kind of weak black man who lets others lead him to his own destruction, then you deserve what you get. Ja Morant, no matter what his on-court exploits may be, he is a case study in weakness because he is totally and thoroughly driven by his insecurities. His mother has infantilized him to a large degree, and his father has given him no guidance. He's not secure about his manhood. He needs other people to validate him. And it seems that his parents have decided to take up that job for him in the wrong ways. Ja Morant is a little bit shorter than the average NBA player. He's about 6'2". I also noticed that he's covered in more tattoos than a freight train, so in his mind, I guess he's equated tattoos with masculinity. His most important job is to secure his position, stack up as much money as he can. Instead, he's trying to impress his parents by being his mother's protector and his father's best buddy. And when they're not around, he's trying to impress random clowns on Instagram. This kid's showing everyone that he doesn't learn from his mistakes, which, by the way, I told you was also another sign of a weak black man. Why is he running around showing people how much money he's got? Why does he feel the need to be flashing a gun? It's because he needs to prove something to himself. But what? Morant has chosen to pursue the low IQ, low standards Instagram crowd because I guess that's a hell of a lot easier than pursuing an NBA championship. It's easy attention, easy praise. He can get himself some clicks and some likes real fast and get himself a quickie little endorphin rush. But that's the kind of thing I would expect from his entourage, his boys who ain't knocking down millions of dollars. That's what I expect from them because that's the best they should be aspiring to. He is a grown man with a child of his own, but he has the mentality of a 12-year-old. Little children with no adult supervision act like this, and sadly, that seems to describe Ja Morant very well. The point that I was trying to make about my refining your circle video is you need to be on the lookout if you see these self-destructive traits in yourself or in those who are in your circle. So many black celebrities think that the black grassroots ought to respect them, and they simply don't understand why we don't. A lot of black people confuse clout chasing with achievement. The problem is Ja Morant is a ball player who keeps taking his eye off the ball. He doesn't want to be the poster boy for making sports pay. He wants to be the flavor of the day on Instagram. He's not chasing a championship, which explains why he doesn't have one. He's chasing social media clout. When I see a pattern of self-destructive behavior like this, it tells me one of two things. One, it means you have someone who doesn't really want the burdens that come with money and fame. He simply can't handle it, and he wants out. Look, while we may all want tons of money, and a lot of people would want to be famous because that means that your name lives on after you die, the truth is not everyone's cut out for it. And a lot of people have no business in that position anyway because they don't have the discipline required to handle it. And the second problem, you have some people who are just perpetual screw-ups. I said to beware a black man who tells you that he's gained and lost a few fortunes because that's a man who doesn't learn from his mistakes. When you see someone who keeps putting themselves in a bad position over and over again, they're trying to tell you something. And what they're telling you is they like it at the bottom. Whether there's some part of them that feels that they don't deserve to be successful or, and this is much more typical, success requires a number of different skill sets that they don't have. The raw talent necessary to excel in your chosen field is only the foundation of success. What you build on top of that is also what matters too. The discipline, the healthy sense of confidence that doesn't need to prove itself, the good judgment that helps you avoid mistakes, those are also the things that you need to keep you successful. Success is not all based on one factor. It takes a number of different factors working together to make someone a success and to keep them there. We see D-boys all the time who sling a little dope, get a little money, run around in a car for a bit, and then either wind up in prison, dead, or broke. But the point is, when all is said and done, they don't have the money anymore. You see it in the music game too, and in other business arenas. People who had just enough hustle in them and just enough luck to get a little money, but they lack the common sense and discipline required to keep it. Morant seems to think the NBA will fall apart without him. That's because they're cutting him big checks, and to him, he thinks that means he's indispensable. He's done things off the court, and the police haven't charged him, so he probably thinks that everyone's going to give him a wide berth, but he's wrong. White power does brain typing when they choose what kind of Negro they want to put on. You think it was an accident that they chose Michael Jordan? They chose him for the same reason they chose Jackie Robinson back in the day. They look for compliant Negroes whose character and mentality shows that they will never attack white power. Maybe their chosen black puppet will break bad on them in another way, but what the puppet won't do is to ever become a competitor to them. And that's what matters most. Ja Morant may tell himself that he's being some kind of rebel, but he's not. He's actually dancing to white power's tune. He's just too stupid to learn the lyrics. He's a fool if he thinks that he can do this and the league will never respond. He's been in a bubble, probably populated by his parents and that gang of sycophants he has hanging around him. Yes, if you do have high talent, if you're a real standout, you will be given more latitude than everyone else. You'll certainly get more chances to screw up than everyone else, but you don't get unlimited chances. The NBA can go from loving you to dropping you overnight, even if you did absolutely nothing wrong, ask Kyrie Irving. Like it or not, there's a black man with a high vertical jump and good scoring accuracy turning 18 every single minute of the day. The NBA will announce that he's out, his endorsements will be pulled, Nike's already removed his shoe from their online store. I didn't know at first if this was legit, but I checked Nike's website and this was what I saw. These white shoe and clothing companies drop black men on a reflex. They absolutely love piling on and doing a feeding frenzy. And he just handed this one to them. They did it to Kyrie Irving for absolutely nothing. What do you think they'll do to someone who actually gives them cause? I've long told you white supremacists absolutely love a cruel prank, especially one that takes a long time to pay off. They love seeing the mark smile and think they've got friends, all the while these white supremacists are sharpening their knives and plotting that black person's downfall. They love to hype a black person to the sky, just so they can watch that black person fall hundreds and hundreds of miles, and they get to laugh every step of the way. They love the steady drip of bad news that they put out whenever they're carrying out one of these dismantlings of a black person. The black man in question loses his job or his contract, they lose their endorsements and sponsorships. They make sure to talk to every person this black man ever had contact with so that you can say, here's one of their teammates, here's one of the actors who was in a movie with them, here's their old publicist, here's one of their friends from high school, etc. And they all denounce them, or at least the ones who get on camera do. And then they wait to see what criminal charges are going to be put on them. The rise and fall of fill in the blank is the white media's favorite narrative, and they make sure that most of the time it's going to be a black man's fall who they're documenting. A shame no one in Ja Morant's circle has clued him into this. Obviously, none of this matters to the hangers-on that he's chosen to surround himself with, but one would have thought that at the very least it would matter to him. Now, I know when you go from being in the middle class like he did to the upper 1% overnight, you have a lot of people pulling at you from all directions. Worse than that, his parents aren't doing him any favors. But worst of all, he seems to think that he has enough money now that he doesn't need to listen to anyone. You got more than a few hard-headed black people who suffer from that particular delusion. They brag to anyone who will listen, show off their little old car or what they have, and then they get into a car wreck, get arrested on some dumb stuff, and that's the beginning of the end. And for the people who will try to go ahead and pretty this up, because there's always a few of those, this is a chess move morons in the comments, let me ask you something. If the NBA cuts Ja Morant loose tomorrow, what's he going to do? What other skills or abilities or traits has he managed to cultivate in all this time? He has a few $1 million to his name, but what would he do with that? Because if he was actually about his money, then he wouldn't have time or interest for all of this foolishness. And who's going to want to deal with him after all this if the NBA drops him? Now, some of you might say, well, maybe he decides to start his own business. Let me tell you something. Right now, he is running Ja Morant Inc. into the ground. Anything else that he decides to start will simply go the same way. Making decisions like this, does anyone think that Ja Morant will have that little old money that he's got in the bank a few years from now? He's decided to blow it at the strip club and making moves that will make him unmarketable and unemployable in pro sports or in media in general. So if the league decides to give him the boot, what is he going to do? I don't know. Maybe he'll start a new career as an Instagram influencer. Good day and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Eve, Sherman Marshall, Tracy Rabb, Sabrina, and Johnny Champ. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.